Let me start with something that sounds absurd. 3 nuclear-armed countries are currently locked in a standoff over a river. Not a border, not a missile test, a river. Now I know how that sounds. You're picturing farmers arguing over irrigation ditches, some slow bureaucratic dispute nobody outside the region cares about. Good. Hold on to that instinct, because in 90 seconds, I'm going to show you why that reaction is exactly what's letting this crisis build in silence. Here's what almost nobody outside South Asia understands. This isn't a story about India and Pakistan. That's the mistake everyone makes. It's a story about one river system that happens to begin in China, cut straight through the most militarized border on Earth, and end in a country that considers the water inside it a matter of national survival. 3 governments, 3 nuclear arsenals, 1 waterway that all of them depend on and none of them fully control. Let's build the picture properly, because once you see the mechanics underneath this, you cannot unsee them. Start with geography. The Indus River is born in the mountains of Tibet, inside Chinese-administered territory, near the sacred peaks around Mount Kailash. From there, it flows west into Ladakh, part of Indian-controlled Kashmir. Then it crosses into Pakistan, where it becomes the backbone of the entire nation. 9 out of every 10 Pakistanis live inside this river basin. It irrigates over 90% of the country's farmland. Every major hydroelectric plant Pakistan owns sits inside the system. If you sat down and tried to engineer the single most effective pressure point against a nation of 240 million people, you could not design a better one than the Indus. Now add the second layer, because geography alone didn't cause this crisis. A treaty did, and so did the breaking of one. In 1960, with the World Bank acting as referee, India and Pakistan signed the Indus Waters Treaty. It split the river system in 2. India got the smaller eastern rivers, Pakistan got the 3 much larger western rivers. For 65 years, through wars, through nuclear tests, through decades of open hostility, this agreement held. Diplomats called it one of the most durable water-sharing arrangements on the planet. It survived everything, until April of 2025. That month, a terrorist attack killed 26 civilians in Indian-administered Kashmir. India blamed Pakistan-linked militants. Pakistan denied any involvement. And within days, India did something no government had done in 65 years of this treaty's existence. It suspended it. Not a renegotiation, not a warning shot, a full abeyance. Here's the part that should unsettle you. Rivers don't stop on command. When a treaty gets suspended, the water already moving downstream keeps moving for weeks. Reservoirs that were already full stay full for a while. So on the surface, nothing changed. Farmers in Pakistan kept irrigating. The taps kept running. It looked fine. It was not fine. The mechanism holding the system together had already been switched off. You were just watching the water that was already in motion before the decision landed. And then came the part almost nobody in the West is paying attention to. Pakistan's water commissioner says he's written to his Indian counterpart multiple times about sudden, unexplained swings in the Chenab River's flow. He says he's gotten no response, not once. India fast-tracked new canal and tunnel infrastructure on the western rivers that had been stalled for years. Indian officials said publicly they were working to make sure Pakistan gets, in their words, not a single drop more than it's forced to. Now here's the twist, and this is the part that changes how you should read everything that's happened since. Pakistan took this to international arbitration, and the court ruled against India twice. Once in 2025, once again in May of 2026, saying the treaty doesn't even permit unilateral suspension in the first place. India rejected both rulings outright, calling the court illegitimate. Sit with that for a second. There is currently no functioning water treaty between 2 nuclear-armed nations sharing the most important river system in South Asia. And the legal mechanism that was supposed to enforce one has been declared meaningless by the part with its hand on the valve. This is where Pakistani officials stopped talking like diplomats and started talking like a country backed into a corner. Pakistan's defense minister has said on record that if the nation's water security is ever truly threatened, Pakistan goes to war over it. Reports say the army chief warned that any damn India bills to choke the Indus gets met with missiles. Pakistan's top military command issued a formal statement pledging to use every measure necessary to secure the country's water rights.
Officials on both sides still insist we're not there yet, but think about the position Pakistan is actually in. Its economy is already propped up by repeated IMF bailouts. Its food supply, its electricity, its drinking water, all trace back to a single river system whose upstream flow its neighbor now controls with no binding agreement in place. When your nation's survival depends on the goodwill of a country you fought 4 wars with, that stops being a policy dispute. That becomes existential math. And existential math is exactly what produces decisions nobody can walk back. Now, here's the part that most coverage of this crisis completely misses. This was never a 2-player game. China sits upstream of both rivals. The Indus itself starts inside Chinese territory. And just to the east, Beijing is building what will become the single largest hydropower facility ever constructed on Earth, a 60-gigawatt complex on the Yarlung-Tsangpo River, right before it crosses into India and becomes the Brahmaputra. This isn't a simple dam. It's a network of tunnels stretching more than 100 miles through the Himalayas, engineered to give China extraordinary command over water that hundreds of millions of people in India and Bangladesh depend on downstream. And unlike the Indus, there is no treaty at all governing this river. None. China has never signed a binding water-sharing agreement with either country sitting below it. So look at the full shape of this. India is squeezing Pakistan downstream using exactly the kind of unilateral upstream leverage that China could squeeze India with tomorrow. The hand on the valve in one relationship is the hand under someone else's valve in the other. That's the part nobody wants to say out loud, because it means the country playing hydro-hegemon in one direction is fully aware of what it would feel like to be on the other end of that leverage, and it's building its own dams anyway, betting it never has to find out. This has happened before. Go back to 1948, right after partition. India briefly cut canal water flowing into Pakistan before any treaty existed at all. And that single incident is part of what pushed both nations to the negotiating table for 12 years until 1960's agreement. The lesson from that moment was supposed to be permanent. Water disputes between nuclear-armed neighbors don't stay contained. They escalate until somebody builds a structure to contain them. That structure just collapsed. And it isn't isolated to South Asia. Look at the Nile. Egypt spent over a decade warning that Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam was an existential threat to its water supply. Ethiopia built it anyway, filled it anyway, and finished it. Cairo could not stop it. Every river state on Earth watching that outcome took notes. The lesson traveling across the globe right now is simple. Upstream power beats downstream desperation, and international law has almost no teeth to stop it. Let me give you the picture that makes this real, not abstract. The glaciers feeding both of these river systems are melting fast. Snow and ice cover across the Indus Basin has already shrunk by nearly a quarter in 20 years. Now picture a summer a few years from now, a weak monsoon. Reservoirs already low from years of tension over data sharing and flow manipulation. Pakistan's farmers facing a planting season with less water than they've had ever. Somewhere in Islamabad, in a room none of us will ever see, someone has to decide what happens next when the population depending on that basin has climbed toward 1.6 billion people and the rainfall hasn't grown with it. That is not a war game scenario. That is arithmetic catching up to geography. Now the calm part, because you need it and because honesty demands it. None of this means nuclear war breaks out next month. Nations do not stumble into that kind of conflict overnight, and both India and Pakistan know exactly what's at stake if they miscalculate. This is a slow-moving structural crisis, not a ticking clock. Anyone telling you this ends in fire this year is selling fear, not analysis. But the direction is not in doubt. So here's what to actually watch. Watch whether India resumes sharing hydrological data on the western rivers, because right now it isn't. And that silence is doing more damage than any single dam. Watch the Chenab and Jhelum flow reports for the kind of sudden swings Pakistan keeps flagging with no response. Watch how far along China's Yarlung-Tsangpo project gets, because every completed tunnel is leverage India will eventually have to answer for. Watch Pakistan's economic indicators, because a country running out of water and running out of foreign reserves at the same time doesn't have the luxury of patience. And watch the monsoon. Every dry year compresses the timeline on everything else on this list. Zoom out and this stops being a regional story. What's happening on the Indus is a preview of a fight playing out on transboundary rivers across the entire planet, wherever upstream power meets downstream dependence and no enforceable rulebook exists to referee it. The treaties built in the 20th century assumed stable glaciers, stable populations, and governments willing to honor arbitration they didn't like. All three of those assumptions just broke at once. So let me land this. A river that begins in Chinese territory, flows through the most militarized border on the planet, and ends in a nation that treats its water supply as a matter of survival. Three nuclear powers bound together by geography none of them chose, with a legal framework that one of them has already decided it can simply ignore. Water wars used to sound like science fiction. In 2026, they're starting to look like foreign policy. And the question nobody in any of these three capitals wants to answer out loud is the same one farmers in the Indus Basin are asking this season, standing next to a canal that's running lower than it did last year. What happens when the water runs out before the diplomacy catches up?